besties, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Kyan and this is Kyan is Booked. This video is a greatly anticipated video simply for myself because I've been thinking about doing my favorites video for this series for a while. So for those of you who don't know, I'm a huge fan of the In-Depth series by Robb, and Robb is actually, let me see if I can find a book that has her, is actually Nora Roberts, and Robb is her pen name. So she's been writing this series, the In-Depth series, since 1995, and yes, she still releases 2 books every single year in this series. So I thought it would be really fun once I got caught up, because I want to say when I was getting caught up, there were like 62 books released in this series. And those are full-length books, not just the novellas. I digress. So when I was first getting caught up on the series, I started reading in 2020. I just read up to like wherever she was in publication. And then I was thinking about doing this video. I was like, oh my gosh, it'd be so fun. I'm already caught up. Like maybe I just kind of go back, re-listen to everything, including the novellas, because there are novellas that she publishes every couple of years as well, which I definitely skipped over the first time, and kind of decide on per year which book is my favorite. Hey book besties, this is Editing Kyan. I was putting together this video and I realized I didn't do a very good job of explaining to you guys like the In-Depth series, what it's all about, like the characters we'll be following. Like, yeah, I told you why each book was my favorite, but I didn't really like go in depth to like, not necessarily the tropes, but like the setting of the book, because this is like a futuristic, like sci-fi series with more heavy on the romantic suspense, but this is like set in the future. So I wanted to go over a few key details with you. And I busted out my whiteboard. How very teacher-like of me. On my very sophisticated box, so that in my setup here, everybody can see it, right? So this is set in 2058. It's a sci-fi, it's futuristic, and it's romantic suspense, right? Okay, so as of right now, or like that I'm remembering, there are 60 plus books, and then we'll probably give like 15 novellas, right? So we're at like 75 plus like stories for the series. It originally started publishing in 1995, which is like really fun. And she releases, like I say, later on in the story, she releases about 2 full-length novels a year, and occasionally she throws in like a novella. So this series follows a cast of characters, a lot of them reoccurring, a lot of them over, I think we'll use blue now, a lot of them over the, like literally like the entire series. We're still hearing about them in book 60 plus. Okay, so Eve is our female main character. She's a lieutenant, homicide. She refers to herself as a murder cop, and she is a murder cop. Then you have Rorik, and we meet him in the first book because he is a suspect in Eve's homicide case, right? And he is just taken with our lieutenant and her Shirley attitude and her business-like approach to everything, and her, I don't care what this is or like how you're hitting on me, like I don't have time for this, like I'm a murder cop, right? So he is a billionaire, and Rorik Industries is what he obviously owns, and it's he has subsidiaries all over the world, and we definitely get to see like the inner workings of like his job, but he works a lot on cases with Eve because he's actually alleged a former criminal, which is also fun. Then we have Peabody, Delia Peabody, and she begins as Eve's aide when Eve pulls her off of patrol, brings her into homicide, really starts to train her up and kind of teach her about like all the ins and outs of how to be a homicide cop, how to work his blah, 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 helps her study for the detective's exam, all that kind of stuff, right? and then she transfers into Eve's partner, and they work super well together. Then you have McNabb, which is Ian McNabb, and he works for EDD. And EDD is the Electronics Department Division, I believe so. It could also be a completely different term, but I honestly cannot remember. He's Peabody's man. Although there are a couple of books there where we're not really sure they're going to get together, and it gets really wild, right? So Peabody's man, and he's a detective and has been a detective the whole time that we've known him. All right, then we have Feeney. I don't think that's how you spell it. We're just gonna put one E here, and if I'm wrong, mind your business. All right, that's what I tell my students. All right, so Feeney is the captain of EDD. So he is McNabb's captain, and he is Eve's former trainer. And then I would also say, almost like a stand-in dad. Because like I said, Eve comes with like a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of things that she's trying to like fight against or, you know, come back from, especially like in the books or whatever. So, you know, like Feeney's really there from like a parental perspective, which is not something that she has. Then we have Mavis Freestone, and she is Eve's BFF, was arrested by Eve. So Eve and Mavis will definitely say this, and she says it a bunch like in the series, but like they become friends after Eve arrests her for stealing. And Mavis always talks about how that is something that like really like turned her life around and really gave her an opportunity to like get on the straight and narrow, and they've been best friends ever since. And what I really too like about their friendship is the fact that Mavis understands Eve on such like a like molecular level that like when Eve is lashing out, or when she's struggling to express her emotions, or she's just not even really sure why she's upset, Mavis is really able to like articulate how she's feeling emotionally, and she so understands like why Eve's job's so important to her, and she's just so very understanding of like all the things that make Eve. And I think it's just like a really like beautiful testament to their friendship that they have that understanding and that space for each other. Then you have Mira, and she is the department psych, aka top shrink. And it takes a while for Eve to really like trust Mira and to open up to her. Like Mira definitely knows that Eve has been through like a huge amount of trauma, and she wants to push, and she really starts to care for Eve as like much more than just like another police officer that she's supposed to like, you know, like evaluate and all of that. And she really starts to see Eve like on a level that she sees her children on. But it's a lot of books and a lot of situations before like Eve's really able to trust her, but Mira helps her work through so much. And some of like the scenes that they have are like so uncomfortable for Eve, but like they're really truly like just so beautiful when it comes to like the relationship that they're building, and I'm obsessed with it. So we definitely see Mira, like I'm pretty positive like she's been featured in like every single book, as soon as she's like really introduced as like a reoccurring character. And then we have Morris, and I'm gonna go ahead and move the board right here. And he is, God, what do you call them? Emmy. And so he's the top guy. He runs the Emmys department. And him and Eve really start to build like a very positive relationship with each other. And, you know, they stand over death every single day, and Morris cares for the dead, like, you know, once Eve like brings them in, and they've worked like serial cases together, and they just have like a really strong like work bond, which I absolutely love for them. And it's definitely apparent in some of the books where like they work on cases that are really touchy, but also like really difficult cases, like especially when like you bring children into it and things like that. So I definitely like really like the growth of like their friendship over the books. So here's my board of knowledge. Here's my board kind of introducing you to the In Death series in case you didn't know like too much about it. It's definitely, if you can't tell, one of my favorite series to jump into, and I really hope you kind of like the favorites idea. I'm definitely going to do another video with like the rest of the books in the series. But yeah, so this is kind of like a if you didn't know, now you know type situation, and I hope you love it. And now I'm going to send you back over to pre-recorded me to let you know all of my favorites now that I've actually told you what the series is about. So we're going to be doing 1995 to 2004 today. I'm going to take it by like 10-year increments, and then we'll see how it is like when we get to the end of the series and the part where like she's still publishing. So for this one, like I said, we're going to start out at the very beginning and go all the way up to 2004. I am going to do another video. I'm a couple of re-listens away from being able to do that one. So probably like February, March. We'll see how it goes. So between 1995 and 2004, she released 23 books in this series. 20 of them are full-length novels, and then 3 of them are novellas. I will tell you, and I'll be very honest, none of the novellas made my favorites of the year. Not because I'm a hater, but simply just because I really enjoyed the crime in the full-length novel versus the novellas. And I'm going to be very clear that this is basically rated off of like which crime that year I thought was like the coolest, essentially. So without further ado, let's get started. And you'll see me pull a sticky note off because I had to put them in order and then put the year on them. So in 1995, the start of the series, the first book is Naked in Death, and then this is where we meet Eve Dallas, who is our female main character, and then of course we also meet Rorik, who is our male main character, and he happens to be one of the witnesses in Eve Dallas's murder investigation because she's a homicide detective at the time. No, she's a police lieutenant. She's a police lieutenant at the time, and his name comes up like in conjunction with one of her investigations, and she knows who he is. Everybody knows who he is because he's a billionaire and he's gorgeous, and everybody is obsessed with him in one way or another. And she is really trying hard not to be obsessed with him, but it's really hard not to be. And then you have Glory in Death, and this one follows Eve as she tries to figure out who's killing like very prominent females. And between these two books, I chose Naked in Death because I absolutely love this book simply because it's where everything started, but also too, it's the beginning of Eve and Rorik's relationship. And while I love them now in the series, and like, you know, I'm to the point where it's been like 2 years since this book, and they're in a really great place in their relationship, there is just something about the newness factor that I absolutely loved. So these are the 2 books that she published in 1995, and Naked in Death is my favorite. Next up, in 1996, she published Immortal in Death and Rapture in Death. Yeah, she published these 2. There were no novellas this year, and Immortal in Death is my personal favorite. So this is the story of, this is right before Eve and, this is the one where they actually get married. And so she's got like her bachelorette party, her bridal shower, like all those like really fun things you do when you first get married. And this is, there's a fatal love triangle that happens, and this follows Mavis, who is her best friend. Eve actually arrested her like years ago for being a grifter and essentially like a con artist, and they've been best friends kind of ever since. And like Mavis always talks about how like Eve saved her life, and without Eve like she wouldn't be anything today, and they've been best friends kind of ever since. Well, she finds herself in this like fatal love story of how there's 2 women, 1 man, and one of the women ends up dead, but then there's like a secret lover type situation. And this is the first time you really see like Eve is a foster child and she has a very, very traumatic past. So I'm gonna say, like, if you have a trigger, like, it's probably brought up in this series, so you definitely need to look out for that. But she was taken advantage of by her father, and that's the YouTube way of me saying that. It was really horrific. Like, they found her bleeding and almost dead in an alley when she was 8, and she was put into the system. So she's a really hard time like making connections. So this is the first time you really see her like go to the mat for somebody who is essentially like her found family. And it's just another layer to Eve, and it's something that there was something about this book and the way that Eve took care of Mavis, and the way that Eve was not going to let her go down for something that she knew she didn't do. And it was brilliant, and it was beautiful, and their found family and like their friendship is one of my favorite parts of this series. So these are the 2 books that were published in 1996. In 1997, she published 2 books. One is Ceremony and Death, and one is Vengeance and Death. And Ceremony and Death is my favorite book. So this is where we kind of get an introduction to her aide, or Peabody. So Delia Peabody is kind of like a new character that's kind of popped up into the series. And this is the first real look at this free ager and this new character in the series that like we get an opportunity to get to know. Like, she is a beat cop, and Eve notices something in her and was like, hey, like, do you want to become a detective? Like, you know, I'll mentor you. You can be my aide. You can work with me on these like murder investigations. So this is the first time we really get an opportunity to see Peabody like flex her detective muscles. And this also brings in Eve's former partner, Captain Feeney. He's responsible for the electronics division. And in this one, a former cop who has since retired is killed, but they deem it as suicide, even though there were question marks around whether or not he committed suicide, because there's some things and some notes that they found on his computer that really left like a lot of suspicion. So sorry, Belle got up. So there were a lot of suspicious things that they found on his computer, and it made them feel like he was kind of like working a case, and that potentially could have gotten him killed. So they give the case to Eve and they ask her to investigate, but Eve doesn't say anything to Feeney because they worked together before her and Feeney worked together. So this then really comes on to, because like Feeney's super mad at her for like not letting her know, and they have this like huge falling out, and she's like, I was just following orders. However, we find ourselves really, really mixed up in like a good versus bad, like Wiccan cult of witches type deal. And it was very interesting to me, and I just thought it was like super cool, like how you have like the good witches and the bad witches and how they're beefing with each other. And the guy who was murdered, his granddaughter got pulled into the cult that's not necessarily the super positive cult, and so he was trying to figure out a way to get her out of it, and that's why he ended up getting killed. So we meet a lot of characters in this one, like Jamie is a character we meet in this one, and he breaks into Eve's house and is like, hey, I need you to help figure out who murdered my sister. And he actually pops up in books like even today. So it's just really, really interesting, but Ceremony and Death was definitely my favorite of the 2. So Vengeance and Ceremony were both published in 1997. In 1998, we had Holiday and Death, and then the novella Midnight and Death. And Holiday and Death is my favorite between the 2 of them, and that is because this follows a serial killing Santa. So he like literally dresses up as Santa Claus and like brings gifts to his victims, and he like knocks on their door and is like, hey, ho ho ho, and they let him in, and then he ends up like absolutely obliterating them, violating them, murdering them, and then just like goes on his little jolly way. So I really found this one to be the most interesting one, simply because who would have thought to use Santa Claus as a serial killer? I mean, hello. So Midnight and Death, the novella, and Holiday and Death are the 2 that she published in 1998. In 1999, you had Conspiracy and Death and Loyalty and Death. And my favorite book was Loyalty and Death, and that's because we follow a former cult that is like being resurrected. So they call themselves Cassandra, and they bomb a really, really important building in New York City. And Eve like takes it as a personal affront because number one, her husband Rourke owns it, and number two, this is her city and these are her people, and how dare you put them in harm's way is her point of view with everything. So push comes to shove, if you will, and she goes up against them. Time is racing because there's this plan that was written years upon years ago before Cassandra was disbanded, because the police caught on and were able to catch the person who was responsible for running it. There was a plan that was created, and now this like new age group of Cassandra has resurrected the plan. So Eve, Rourke, and the team are trying to outrun the plan and outrun everything that's happening and the bombings that are going on. And it looks as though like all of Rourke's buildings are being targeted, and that also makes Eve mad, because she's like, what you're not gonna do is come after my man. So one thing for sure, two things for certain, Eve's not letting anything happen to her man. So you've got Conspiracy and Death and Loyalty and Death for 1999. And then we're gonna enter the 2000s. So in 2000, we had, let me take the sticky note off. We had Witness and Death and Judgment and Death. Both bangers, but Witness and Death was definitely my favorite. And Eve and Rourke are attending a show, like a theater show at one of the theaters that Rourke owns, and somebody takes the stage knife and swaps it for a real one. So when one of the characters goes to stab one of the other characters and kill him, she actually ends up killing him. So she's literally a witness to the murder, and this is a really convoluted, like it goes back into the history of like the entire cast, and like you kind of get like the beef in between all the actors and the drama behind the scenes of like how hard it is to get certain roles. And you know, Eve is embroiled in the fact that like once again something of Rourke's is inside one of her investigations, and also too like she's a witness to this murder. So shouldn't she be able to figure out who actually committed the murder? So it was just really cool that it was done in a way that there's this play that's being performed and that character is being murdered, but then the character actually dies. So in 2000, you had Witness and Death and you had Judgment and Death. In 2001, you had Betrayal and Death and you had Seduction and Death. And let me double check. Okay, yeah, so this is kind of, I found this one to be the most interesting because it's kind of the beginning and like the concept of like online dating. So, you know, this guy's been courting her for like a couple of weeks and they go on this really great date, and then he gives her a little too much of the drugs that he picked up. And when push comes to shove, like she ends up being thrown off a balcony and dies. And he kind of just like waltzes out and goes on about his business, and it awakens something in him. And it's that like instinct of like, well, I've already done it and I got away with it, so like why wouldn't I do it again? So it's like Eve's race against the online dating world, and the aspect of this guy who has had this like awakening inside of him. And, you know, how do you tell all the women of New York City to be careful of the dates that they go on when there are how many women in New York City? So that is Eve's struggle. So Betrayal and Death and Seduction and Death are the two that were, what do you call it? Published in 2001. There was also a novella, Interlude in Death, that was published as well. All right, next up we have 2002, and this is Reunion and Death and Purity and Death, and my favorite one from 2002 is Purity and Death. So this is, okay, let me make sure I explain this correctly. So this is a virus that is uploaded into somebody's computer that convinces them in a backhanded way to unalive themselves. And you sit at your computer and you're not sure like what the person has downloaded in order to have them breaking out into these spasms. But this guy comes out of his apartment after like playing like music obnoxiously loud and like really going through it, super angry and just like beats this guy to death and then kills himself, right? And so Eve shows up at the murder scene. It's bloody, it's gruesome, but everybody had like nothing but nice things to say about this guy. And the fact that he ends up doing this has everybody confused, right? And then it happens again. And so Eve picks up on the fact that it's happening through the electronics, right? But how is it happening through the electronics is the question. So I thought this was really interesting because it talks about like the importance of purity. So in the suicide notes that they all wrote, it talks about the importance of like making sure that they're pure or purifying themselves, and like that's how Eve picks up on everything. So these are the 2 books that were published in 2002, and Purity and Death is my favorite. Next up, we have 2003. This is crazy. Okay, 2003. So you have Portrait in Death and Imitation in Death, and my favorite is Portrait in Death. So this follows a killer who has a very specific type, like young, brunette, beautiful, and he kidnaps them, gives them medication, poses them, takes pictures of them, and ultimately like kills them, and then continues to take pictures of them after they're dead, right? And the idea is like there's purity in their souls, and there's purity in who they are, and this will help the killer, or this will help them save the people in their lives that they need to be saved, because they're putting that pureness back out into the world. Obviously, this dude is like 1 crayon loose of a full box, or is missing a couple crayons, obviously. But it was a very interesting concept. And I thought it was kind of like different than like the run-of-the-mill murder that not necessarily Eve goes up against, but just of like, oh wow, like this guy got mad and like bashed this person in the head or whatever, because you do see them definitely have those types of cases. But like, is it the assistant to the photographer? Is it the girl's, not necessarily stalker, but like guy who is like her admirer? Like, who could it possibly be? And why would they want to do this to her? So I just really loved the concept of it. So these are the 2 books that she published in 2003. And here we are, friends, at 2004. So in 2004, there was a Robb novella that was published in Remember When, which was something that was published by Nora Roberts under Nora Roberts. And then she also had Divided in Death and Visions in Death. And my favorite was Divided in Death. And Divided in Death is, okay, so somebody sets up Riva, and Riva works for Rorik, and Cairo, I don't know how I messed up her name. I listened to the audiobooks. Cairo works for Rorik as his administrative assistant, and Riva used to work for the Secret Service, and she works in like the security department. And she's been set up, and they call Rorik immediately, and Rorik calls Eve and was like, hey, like, I need you to do this because she wouldn't do this, and I need you to care for her. Like, these are my people, and they, they work for me, and I know they wouldn't do something like this. So, and it ends up that it's Riva's ex-husband or current husband. I don't know if they were like in the process of like breaking up or not. That's neither here nor there in this. Either way you look at it, she's in serious trouble for the fact that they believe, or the world believes in the way that it was set up, is that she murdered her husband. And she has a real issue, obviously, like not convincing Eve, but the problem is like there's so much evidence against her that it's finding hard to prove that it really wasn't her, because Eve believes her. Eve's like, no, like I hear what you're saying. Like, I totally understand what you're saying. I don't think, she's like, it's too neat, it's too tidy, it's too everything for me to believe that it was you who did this, right? So Eve's on a mission to make sure that she takes care of like what's going on, and to find the real killer, because despite the fact that we're not the biggest fan of the husband, like he still deserves to have justice. So that's the mission that she was on in this one. And I really just dug how Rorik was very much embroiled in this, but you really got to see her go to the mat for people that take care of her husband like on a daily basis. And like, obviously this comes back to a situation of like what he's working on at his companies and things that are considered like code red that you can't talk about, because he has a lot of like military contracts and a lot of things that he, that he's working on kind of behind the scenes. So it definitely comes back to something like that. And Riva's obviously a target, but Eve's big question is, how do I prove that? So Divided in Death is definitely my favorite book of the 2 that were published in 2024. And okay, so we just made it through 10 years of the In Death series. Few notes before I sign off. So number one, if you're looking for a series that is really sorry, Belle is super, I don't know, having a day. So first thing I want to say definitely is if you're looking for a series that you kind of just like want to listen on audio, that's like really easy to follow along with, that will be entertaining, I definitely recommend this series in audio. Susan Erickson does every single audiobook of this series, and each character has its own voice, and you can definitely tell like the differences when the characters are talking. So it's really great, and it's just a really nice way of doing like this cast, who's definitely an ensemble cast. So I definitely wanted to asterisk that it's a very good series to listen to on Audible or at your library. Majority of these books are at the library. I listen to them through my Libby app, given the fact that like they have been published for such a long period of time. And I say long, but you know, like the series started in 1995. So these are definitely books that are available at the library. Also too, Rorik, our main man, is one of my main men, so he's definitely on my top book boyfriends of ever. He is absolutely amazing. The relationship between him and Eve is nowhere near perfect, and there's plenty of times that like they get into spats and they get into fights and like they stop talking to each other. But what I really like about the relationship is that they always come back and like they circle back and go, hey, you know, I didn't handle that the way that I should have, like I'm really sorry. And you really get to see like the intricacies of their relationship. And I also really like the fact that, you know, Eve is who she is, and she's been that way since they first met, and he's never once tried to change her, never once tried to make her be somebody that she's not, and their relationship is like just so beautiful because of it. And I am obsessed with this man, and I am obsessed with he's just absolutely amazing. So I definitely recommend the series. Hopefully you guys will come back for the next one. I'm going to do 2005 to 2014, so another 10 years. And yeah, oh my gosh, I can actually do 2015 to 2004. Okay, so like that'll be really cool. It's actually gonna work out. So as always, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you start this series down in the comment box below. This is definitely like one of my top series, and one that I will like forever recommend to people because it is so good. Be sure to like this, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I would always love to have new book besties. And as always, I will catch you in the next one. Bye.